Tonight on Did They Deserve It? A double homicide, arson, and an attempted poisoning, followed by a string of murders nearly 2 decades later. Could the murders have been justified? This case is not new to the headlines over the last 40 years. The driving force behind the murders revealed with the death of the killer. But we seek your assistance with another mystery. With many things answered, these murders resulted in another set of questions. Most poignantly, did they deserve it? In the summer of 1958, 2 camp counselors were senselessly murdered following the tragic but accidental drowning of a special needs camp attendee. Over the following years, the camp suffered an incident of arson and of poisoning the grounds and waters until the camp closed for almost 18 years. Upon the camp's reopening in 1980, tragedy struck again, and 7 more deaths occurred on these grounds. The ordeal came to a head with the sole surviving counselor, Alice Hardy, fighting for her life and eventually decapitating the killer, one Mrs. Pamela Voorhees, the mother of famed killer Jason Voorhees. Jason's last known whereabouts were somewhere in space, but as of this taping, he is still at large. The story of Mrs. Voorhees has been told time and time again, and you can find case studies on her mental break and decades-long bloodlust in criminology classes across the country. What has rarely been considered is the basis of tonight's report. Did the victims deserve it? Let's look at the evidence. Before we begin, viewer participation is encouraged in the comments. With your tips and takes on these matters, we will update the story in an upcoming episode. The first victims at the hands of Mrs. Voorhees were the 2 star-crossed lovers, Barry and Claudette. Based on witness testimony, Barry and Claudette slipped away from the group for a little innocent, over-the-uniform heavy petting. Their bodies were found in the loft space of a cabin, Barry suffering a stab wound to the chest, and Claudette apparently scared to death. By all accounts, since Jason's drowning occurred the summer prior, Barry and Claudette could not have been responsible for his drowning. So the question is, did they deserve it? Our experts say, a little heavy petting never hurt anyone. Accordingly, they did not deserve it. With an 18-year hiatus, Mrs. Voorhees picked up the machete again in 1980. Based on the timeline that we have obtained, her first victim that summer was the camp cook, Annie. Annie saw her demise after getting picked up by Mrs. Voorhees while hitchhiking to the camp, subsequently chased down into the woods, and her neck slashed. Apparently, Mrs. Voorhees then drove Annie's body around in her Jeep for the remainder of the day. From what we could uncover, Annie loved working with kids and held the same position as Mrs. Voorhees at the camp. With these similarities with Mrs. Voorhees, we would have anticipated a kinship warranting final girl status. Accordingly, our determination is, with her sunny personality and Charlie's Angels hair, Annie was innocent and did not deserve it. Mrs. Voorhees' next victim was camp counselor and archer, Ned. Ned also suffered a slashed neck and was gently placed in his bunk. Poring over countless interviews, we learned that Ned played dangerous games with his co-workers, including firing arrows at unsuspecting colleagues, faking a drowning to steal a kiss from the very same counselor, and was rather insensitive regarding the indigenous peoples that previously inhabited the Crystal Lakes lands. With blatant disregard for the health and welfare of his fellow counselors, and a willingness to openly sexually harass his coworker in front of others, our panel has determined that Ned was what the kids call today a douche. Accordingly, yeah, Ned deserved it. Mrs. Voorhees then moved on to a counselor who, from all accounts, had the face of a Hollywood star. Jack was stabbed in the neck while he lay on his bunk. Mrs. Voorhees pierced through Jack's mattress and through his throat while holding his head in place. By all accounts, Jack was always willing to pitch in and was well liked by his co-counselors. Our experts have determined, with a face for the big screen and ability to keep everyone footloose, he did not deserve it. The next victim was Jack's love interest, Marcy. Marcy suffered a hatchet to the head while in the latrine. Marcy was known to spring into action when a friend was in need and often amused herself with impressions in the bathroom mirror.
You'll always be playing.
Did Marcy deserve to have her wig split? Our panel has determined that no, Marcy did not deserve it. Mrs. Voorhees moved on to camp counselor Brenda. Brenda was apparently bound, assaulted, and heaved through a window. She too was known to help whenever and however needed. Documents recount a time when Brenda dove in and dragged a fellow counselor out of the lake that was seemingly drowning. With an otherwise pleasant affect, coupled with her swimming prowess, we believe that Mrs. Voorhees would have found Brenda to be an asset to Jason. Accordingly, our determination is, nope, she did not deserve it. Reports indicate that in one of the most violent attacks, Mrs. Voorhees stalked Counselor Bill through the rain, firing an arrow through his left eye and groin, slashed his throat, and pinned him to the back of a cabin door. By all accounts, Bill was a pleasant enough individual and offered to help a hand when he thought Ned was drowning. Bill suffered one of the more horrendous deaths, and in the panel's estimation, he did not deserve it. The sixth murder of the night was the head counselor, Steve Christie. As Mr. Christie was approached on the outskirts of the camp, Mrs. Voorhees buried a hunting knife into his chest and hung him from a tree. Christie's friends say that he was dedicated to making Camp Crystal Lake a success, and the local waitress noted that he was a nice guy who always left a tip. Although he disregarded all of the folklore about the camp, he had good intentions and a strong mustache game. Verdict? Nah, he didn't deserve it. Lastly, we discuss one last death that fateful night, the beheading of Mrs. Voorhees. The Voorhees case has been analyzed for 4 decades, and the primary consensus was that her death likely saved the lives of countless others. Experts in the field believe that, as a single mother managing a special needs child in the late 50s, she likely carried a significant weight on her shoulders. At the moment of her son's tragic drowning, the weight became too significant and she suffered a permanent break, resulting in finding everyone she came into contact with at fault with his drowning. Something not often explored was her increased violence, with the first few victims suffering stabbings and slashed throats. But based on how some of the victims were found, Mrs. Voorhees also displayed immense strength, pinning a man to a door, chucking a full-grown woman through a window, and stringing another grown man up in a tree. Did she develop this strength through her anger? Did she gain strength with each kill because there can only be one? Or did she have a darker secret? With so much unknown, the verdict is, society would have been better served with her still around to study. Before we go, there are 3 honorable mentions. Our final girl, Alice, the truck driver, and the affectionately named Crazy Ralph. Alice is the only individual known to have come face to face with Mrs. Voorhees and survived. On numerous occasions, Alice has recounted her harrowing ordeal, being chased through the camp, trading blows with the attacker, and finally beheading Mrs. Voorhees with a single swing of the machete. With an unrelenting spirit and Dorothy Hamill smile, the determination is, Alice earned the win.
Flawless victory.
Can I get a buzz or something?
We also have the truck driver. Reports note that he happily gave the camp cook and first victim, Annie, a ride halfway to the camp. We also uncovered that he was known to make uncomfortable comments to young women and was accused of touching some inappropriately under the guise of assisting them into the truck. With this newfound knowledge, our panel has determined he should at least be required to wear a creep badge. Lastly, we have Crazy Ralph. From interviews collected around, Ralph has been a loner most of his time in town, peddling his bike as much as his, pretty accurate doomsday theories.
It's got a death curse!
Annie claimed that she found him hiding in the camp's kitchen closet once. Our verdict regarding Ralph, although popping up at the most inopportune times, he did try to warn the counselors of impending doom, and was clearly conscious of his footprint on the environment. Accordingly, Ralph deserves to keep on creeping on. Thank you again for watching. Did they deserve it? Come back for our next episode regarding the family of the Babadook. Did Mom deserve to be tortured by both the Babadook and her child? Did their dog deserve a better fate? And did her bratty son deserve to be fed to the Babadook like so many worms? Join us next time on Did They Deserve It?